Hello, I'm making this video because I paid a visit to Audio T in Brighton today. I've just got back because I wanted to hear the new Rega range of speakers. Okay, outgo the old RS range and in come the new RX range. Okay, so out with the RS, that's the wrong way around then, sorry, and then here we have the new X range. Okay, there were 5 speakers in the old RS range: the RS1s, RS3s, RS5s, RS7s and RS10s. Okay, I still think they've got a few RS10s, at least they haven't taken them off the website yet. But essentially, we now have this new range, okay? RX1, RX3 and RX5. The RX1 is the bread and butter stand mount speaker. The other two are a small and a slightly larger floor stander, okay? So yeah, and the speakers that you can see behind me here are R3s, okay? So they are 2 generations behind in terms of speakers, okay? And they are essentially, I've had those in 2005, so they're 10 years old. And so I've been hankering, I know, and I know I've done a lot of upgrading and whatever, but I've just about scraped enough together, and I found on the web, on Audio T's Reading store, a pair of outgoing RS5s at roughly half the price to new. Okay, and I'm afraid I've bought those, and I'm afraid I've also bought them without hearing them, which I know is a terrible thing to do. Okay, but so I suppose like the purpose of today's visit really was to get some slightly better speaker cable to accommodate the new RS5s, and also to hear what the RX3s sounded like. Just so that I've got some sort of comparisons really to do, and it's an amazingly good deal, and you can still also get 1 or 2 pairs of RS3s that are at sort of a radically reduced price as well. Okay, that's essentially like the context of why I wanted to do that. Okay. So I did some listening last night and this morning, trying to sort of think, well, what am I going to take with me to here? And I came up with these 3 albums. Okay, I'll put them in the order that I listened to them in. Okay, started out here with John Mayer's Battle Studies album, which I think was around about 2009, something like that came out. It's a lovely album, really nice album, and not too badly recorded. Okay, on my R3s, and I listened to it, just before I came out. Okay, so that I knew, and had it fresh in my mind. The recording is slightly veiled in today's sort of loudness ward. It's not really loudness ward, not compared to some of the more aggressive kind of chart music. More of that later. But it's still, because they wanted to get it loud, they've still done a certain amount of compression there, which makes things sound slightly veiled, slightly less sort of concrete there than it perhaps could be. Compared to other recordings that I've got of other albums, whatever. I've also done a little bit of critical listening, of other albums as well, on my R3s. Particularly CDs, because it's not necessarily quite the same with vinyl. It's a different sort of kettle of fish, really. But on my CDs particularly, you know, if I push the volume up to, you know, beyond the sort of quarter of the way up position, then I'm aware of a certain amount of hardness, particularly in the mid-range and the upper mid-range. And on the John Mayer track, which I chose, which was track 9, it was called Edge of Desire, there's some pretty sort of biscuit tinny style cymbals that are played in a very kind of robotic way, kind of thing. Yeah, they're quite prominent, and you know, you just think, you know, those cymbals sound like biscuit tins, kind of thing. So I put them on the RX3s, also using the same CD player as I've got at home, the Apollo R, it's Rega's basic CD player, and you know, the Alexa amplifier. Okay, going through the RX3s, and suddenly that sound transformed itself. Okay, still relative to other recordings, it will still always be a laid-back recording, but John Mayer, his vocals there, sitting on a stool, I kind of imagined him there. You know, you could almost kind of, you know, pinpoint, you know, exactly where he was sitting. Those drums and you know, particularly the cymbals, were reduced further back. Okay, because what I was kind of like really aware of, you know, in comparison to my R3s, was the amount of space around the instruments, okay, and between the performers, which is never really there. What it was doing is unraveling a certain amount, you know, more detail. Okay, and I'll come on to it, you know, perhaps, you know, a bit more later, but you know, that you really were aware of that. Okay, in the guitar solo, it sounds like one guitar is playing via the Apollo LX and R3s, and it really isn't actually. You know, there's a double track guitar there and a certain amount of kind of delay that is very subtle, but was reproduced absolutely sort of spiffingly by the RX3s. Yeah, it's just lovely to hear. So kind of moving on from that, I played a much better recorded album, much more present, and less loudness ward, less compressed recording. Okay, it's this Knitting Sorely Beyond Skin album. I've shown this numerous times on YouTube because I take it with me quite a lot, you know, when I go and hear demos. Again, I've spoken about this song, The Conference, before. It really is my favourite hi-fi demoing track, and I let it segue into track 12, the final track, which is Beyond Skin, the title track of the album. Okay, Beyond Skin is quite a topical track, really, because you know, we've just had the 70th anniversary in the last week of the Hiroshima bombing, and that's what Beyond Skin is about. Okay, it kind of starts off with this kind of explosion, or this explosion effect, with the voice of the inventor of the bomb talking about the blast, really. And you know, he's obviously, you know, really depressed about the fact that it was ever used, and yeah, I suppose cursing himself that he ever really invented it, because, you know, but you know, and it then goes into this percussion and drum kit. Okay, so I think you've got a drum kit and you've got sort of synth percussion as well. Okay, and then everything stops and you have this kind of beautiful guitar acoustic guitar emerging out of silence, playing this lovely, very mournful, sad melody. It goes from loud to this solo guitar, really quiet. Okay, and above that you have, joining it a bit later, you've got this female Indian vocalist just on a sort of R, just singing this tune. And then finally you hear the inventor of this bomb again repeating himself. Okay, and via my R3s, okay, I just, I thought, can anything sound any better than that? The stereo is beautifully laid out, and it's just so poignant and so sad. And then I put it on the RX3s in the shop, and they just blew me away. The sense of drama there, which is, it's understated drama, because last time when I was auditioning the Alexa and the Illicit amplifiers, they had RS3s there, and those RS3s, which are from the outgoing range, and at the same price point really, and same point in the range as my R3s over there. But yes, you're aware of, I didn't take that track with me, but the stereo kind of thing was there. You're aware, I talked about the Gary Newman track and how that had things all bouncing around the stereo thing, and it was all very explicit in that, because that track is an explicit, explicitly makes use of that kind of stereo thing, but you weren't aware of too much space around the instruments, which you were listening to the Conference and Beyond Skin on the RX3, and this understated drama really suddenly came into stark relief. And you just think, blimey, these things really do dynamics. It wasn't quite as explicit as I'd heard it on the Isis and Osiris when I went there about 5 years ago now, to hear the their top end Isis and Osiris CD player and amp coming through RS3s, which were very, very a long way beneath the quality of those amps, and certainly beneath the price range by many times. You really, you are talking the Isis and Osiris together. I think you get a discount, and I think if you buy them together, and it's 12 grand's worth of CD player and amp. Okay, so to play them on speakers that cost a few £100, it's just ridiculous really, and it's just amazing that it worked. But it's a bit like skinning a banana really. Most of us tend to go for the stalk end of the banana, and you've got to break that, and do it. And monkeys find the easy way to do it, and they take the other end and just squash it slightly, and the skin splits, and out comes the banana. Okay, and I suppose the hard way, the breaking the banana skin open by the stalk way, is to spend 12 grand on your electronics and a tiddly widdly bit in comparison on speakers. The easy way is to make sure that your speakers are roughly at the same price point as your other electronics, and it just evens things out a bit, and it's getting that synergy, isn't it? Because if your speakers are way above the price point of your front end, then it's just going to reveal the weaknesses in your front end, and the speakers are going to way outshine those components, and the other way around, the components are going to outshine the speakers, and it's a case of getting that synergy right. And getting that synergy right is taking the easy bit of the banana and squashing it, and boom, there it is. Okay, and that is kind of what I was aware of today with those RX3s, okay, which are I'll talk about the pricing a bit later on, but they are now they're way above the price of these R3s that are here now, because they kind of replace and sort of take a different sort of part of the range, really. And you know, yeah, I've got my RS5s and they're heavily discounted, but even so, at, you know, a brand new thing, they would be more or less at the same price point as, you know, certainly my amp and you know, my record player. So yeah, I was just blown away by those RX3s producing Nitin Sawhney. You know, it was just fantastic. You know, it has to be said they were using NACA 5 speaker cable, which did kind of give you a little bit of, you know, extra bass bloom than I like, okay, and a little bit of extra treble tiz. No, I don't really like that extra bass boom. Sorry, I don't really like it. What am I talking about? Yeah, they were using this NACA 5 speaker cable, which you know, gives a little bit of extra kind of bass bloom and an extra bit of treble tiz. But even so, the character of those speakers is everything beautifully separate, everything detailed, lovely stereo spread in front of you, very, very physical. Okay, yeah, brilliant. Right, so then I thought, because, you know, and again, you know, I've been talking about this kind of hardness in the mid range, and with my current setup here. Okay, I'll talk about it again in a minute, because I was a bit worried really about putting this on, because I didn't want to annoy the guys in Audio T, and I did kind of apologise and say I'm putting some chart music on now, and, you know, you're going to have to sort of put up with my tasty music. But I absolutely love Adam Lambert. I suppose I've come to him a little bit later on, but this album is great. It's really good fun. Okay, and I chose 2 tracks from here to put on, which were track 4, Never Close Our Eyes, and track 12, which is Outlaws of Love. Okay, I don't know this album particularly well, it has to be said, because it's one of those albums that I have to be careful of with the neighbours, and so I tend to put it on when I think they're going to be out. And yeah, so I put on track 4, and suddenly I was aware of more backing vocals in there than I thought of. Okay, than I, you know, kind of previously thought or noticed. Anyway, because I've only listened to this album casually, but then blimey, you know, there's there's actually an extra harmony vocal in there that I hadn't realised was actually there. Okay, because everything was sort of beautifully kind of spread out in front of you. And I got this home again and played it again. I did hear that extra vocal. It's not like the R3s weren't revealing it. It's just that because, you know, it in comparison, and we are talking comparisons here, you know, these R3s are wonderfully detailed speakers, and they're you know, and they do give a good stereo impression, but it's just not as good, nowhere near as good, in fact, as those RX3s. And that, you know, for anyone who's heard these R3s before, you know, that they you know, they will be blown away, you know. So Never Close Our Eyes then, and also this hardness, while it was still there, I was still aware of it. It kind of it wasn't as intrusive as I thought it would be. So, you know, having turned it down a little bit, you know, I didn't want to annoy the man in the shop. I quickly turned it up again, and I played Outlaws of Love, and yeah, Adam Lambert sort of walked on the stage, took a breath, and sang. And it was just absolutely beautiful. And again, far more low-level detail being revealed here. Okay, in particular, some whispered vocals at the end, which are lovely. Okay, and you know, there's this fullness to his voice and texture which wasn't there, and you know, is not necessarily being revealed to its best by my R3s. You know, it's just amazing to behold, really. You know, lovely little tinkling synthesizers going on up in the treble there. Beautiful. Sorry, I've got to put my password in. I've made this video once already and it went on for 40 odd minutes. I'll try not to do the same again. Oops, I got my password wrong. Let's get it right. Hurrah, I'm back again. Okay, so yeah, just an absolutely stunning album. Now this man has they're lovely guys in Audio T, okay, and always, I say always, but I don't always do it myself, you know, take my RS3, RS5 story, but yeah, but, you know, go and listen, you know, they will let you, you know, and because of that, they get returning customers, you know, and so, you know, it's in their interest to let you listen, and you know, particularly in Brighton, it's, you know, they're just very, very friendly and really nice, and they'll, you know, and they'll talk to you about the equipment and everything, and they'll hear your opinions on it and whatnot, and you know, they're genuinely, you know, sort of friendly bods, really. So he's made my speaker cable, and he said, you know, if you want to carry on listening, then by all means do so, and you know, just pick the speakers, pick the cable up when you're ready. And so I said to him, is your Saturn plugged in? The Saturn is the next CD player up from the Apollo. It's the full size sort of case thing, he said no, but it can be. So I played Outlaws of Love again on the Apollo, on the Saturn-R, okay, and I played this track, Edge of Desire, here, the one with the funny symbols on it, the biscuit tin symbols on it, on the Saturn-R, and from the conclusion that I draw from that is that if there's any sort of mid-range harshness in my system, it is actually coming from the CD player, because the Saturn-R just lost it completely, and you know, more space around the instruments and more tangibleness and more sort of reality there. The difference between it was not as night and day as between the R3s and the RX3s, but it was still enough for you to notice that, yeah, it has sort of gained more refinement and you know, more sort of palpable texture to it. So yeah, you know, but having said that, whether it was 3 times the price more, which is the differential between the Saturn-R and the Apollo-R, is you know, remains to be seen, you know. Certainly, you know, there was every difference. They didn't have an Osiris in there that I could see today, and an Isis, but you know, certainly I think the Isis CD player would, you know, you would be dropping your jaw at the level of detail and stuff that it pulled out, whereas the Saturn-R, you just thought, yeah, that's far more civilized, it's far nicer. And I think part of the reason for that is the fact that in the Apollo-R you've only got one digital to audio converter, i.e. a DAC or a DAC, whereas the Saturn-R I think has got 2. And speaking to the guy in the shop about it as well, they make a separate DAC, the Rega DAC it's called, which brings the Apollo-R up to nearly, supposedly, I didn't hear it, but nearly the same level as the Saturn-R, but not quite. So yeah, you know, it's a nice CD player, and yeah, but those RX3s are absolutely stunning and absolutely gorgeous, okay, and you know, they are most definitely an improvement over my R3s, okay. I don't know how much of an improvement over the RS5s that I've just ordered and will be with me on Wednesday are, okay, because, and this is where I've got my, only real misgiving about the whole thing. And although it's a misgiving, again, it's got to be put into context, which I'll try and do as well. And I'll try not to take long to explain it, okay? But, okay, when I bought my R3s, okay, this was 10 years ago, okay, and I just had a really awful car accident, and it wasn't my fault, but it was a terrible accident, and it's left me feeling quite sort of damaged about it, really. But one of the things I did get was a pair of speakers I got a tiny bit of compensation. Really, there's no amount of compensation that can actually sort of value an accident, but that's another point, really. But I got a little bit of compensation for it, and one of the things I did with it was bought those R3s. And when I bought them, the R1s, as they were, which were their budget stand mount speaker, were 250 quid. Okay, the RX ones in 2015 now are now 750 quid. Okay, or roughly about that, I think. 750 or 799, something like that. And it just kind of led me thinking, well, look, if you bought a Rega RP1 record player, even with the performance pack on it, okay, I talked about this a video or so ago, it's basically the same sort of level as the old Planner or P2 as it became. Okay, yeah, the Planner 2, and then it kind of became the P2 somewhere along the line. Okay, particularly with the performance pack on it, it's a record player of that ilk and that standard. Okay, and for years and years and years and years and years now, that record player has been about 200 quid. Okay, they've managed to keep, despite inflation and everything else, they've managed to keep producing a record player that is the same amount of notes nowadays as it was years and years ago. Okay, it's the same with the Apollo R CD player. Okay, when I first bought my Planet in 1998, which was Rega's first CD player, okay, and it has to be said, rather wonderful as well, very analog sounding like. The Apollo R, yes, they've reduced the size of the case and whatnot to keep the price down, but they've still managed to keep that at roughly, it's a tiny bit more, but not too much more, the same amount of banknotes that you paid in 1998 for, the entry-level CD player. Okay, the Saturn's gone up in price, but, they've managed to keep a bread-and-butter CD player there and a bread-and-butter record player. Okay, even the RP3 record player, by the way, is still not a million miles away, particularly with the cartridge. If you take the cartridge out of the equation, it's still not a million miles away from what I paid for my P3, again, sort of back in 2004. So it's, you think, well, hold on, why can't they do the same for a speaker? Because as I'm, talking about with this synergy business, it really makes sense. Yes, you've got to listen. I'm not saying don't ever listen and buy blindly, but, you are going to get the most synergy out of a system and not feel like one component is radically outshining the other if you pay roughly the same for each component. Okay? I'm sure that, paying 750 quid for a pair of, Rega's RX1 stand mounts is, it will withstand a number of upgrades, okay? And, it will certainly, if you've bought an RP6 record player, or even, an Apollo R CD player, it will, certainly get the best out of those components. But it's not really inviting in someone that really is on a budget, considering that Rega's motto is real, it is, superb hi-fi quality sound at realistic price points. You think, well, hold on, it's not a realistic proposition to buy an RP1 and a you know, a Brio amp, and then suddenly you know, whack on that kind of premium for speakers. Particularly you're talking stand mounts, you've got to buy stands for them. You can't just bung them on the floor or stick them on furniture. You can get the wall brackets for them, but that I think is just a headache, you know, in terms of getting them at the right height, the right distance apart, and everything else, keeping them out of corners, and everything else that you've got to do with them. You know, it's really, you know, the easiest and, you know, kind of best thing to do to buy a pair of stands. But buying a pair of stands is then taking you up to the same price as those RX3s that I listened to today. Okay, because those RX3s are now replacing the RS5s. Okay, they're not a direct replacement for R3s and RS3s. Okay, they're a whole level above that. And you know, the RX5s are now sort of in the same price point as the old RS7s. And you know, yes, there are real reasons for that. You know, the case of those speakers is thicker. They've employed a new tweeter, and they've also developed a new, because they've been using this RR125 bass mid speaker cone for a long time now, for, you know, many years, and they've just replaced that. So, you know, that is, you know, it kind of justifies the price hike. But you'd think, well, hold on a minute, can you not do like Apple do on you know, whenever a new MacBook Pro is released, or even a new iMac, they still keep iPad, they still keep some of the outgoing ones and sell them off a bit cheaper. Okay, and it would be nice if Rega had done that, you know, particularly with their RS3s, because, you know, that is, you know, the easier option than buying stand mount speakers and finding a decent pair of matching stands to go with them. But if they'd managed to keep those RS3s at a lower level, a lower price level, so that someone coming in buying an RP1 and, you know, a Brio amp has got something that's round about that same kind of level for them to you know, to get that, you know, wonderful system synergy from. Okay, so really that is my gripe. Although, having said that, you know, with regards to the competition that you know, Rega face, you know, if you take a manufacturer like PMC, who makes some fantastic speakers, including the Fact 8s, which Rega have said, you know, are a beautiful match for their Isis and Osiris amps. You know, and again, it's £6,000 worth of speaker, possibly more, I think. But yeah, you know, that is. You know, that even their basic stand mounter is double the price of Rega's RX1. Okay, so, you know, to get something that's of, you know, PMC's same level as RX3, you've got to pay an extra £1,000 over and above the RX3. So yes, they are, by one standard, keeping things reasonable. But on another standard, you know, from a system synergy point of view, you know, those RX1s, I'm sure, are a really good stand mount speaker, and will withstand, you know, a lot of upgrades. But it's not quite in the same kind of budget ballpark as somebody that wants to, you know, buy an RP1 and, you know, try and get something that's going to complement it and not show it up for the fact that it really is, you know, and a well tried and tested but cheap as chips way of making a record player, you know, because that's what it will do. Okay, yes, it will sound nice, but you'll be feeling all the time, you know, oh, my record player can do more than that, my record player can do more than that, you know. And you know, within 12 months you'll be buying an RP6 and saying, yeah, now those speakers are really singing. So yeah, you know, it's a shame really. But yeah, RX3s a very competitive speaker, very, very high-end speaker, and get the rest of the system right, and the rest of the, you know, the price match really right, and you know, it will really show what your components are capable of doing. Okay, as I say, my Apollo-R CD player, I'm not going to go and buy a Saturn-R. I'm sorry, I'm not going to buy one. I really can't. I really can't afford it. But you know, I'm going to, you know, live, you know, really, really cheaply for the next month or so, and I've got my RX3 speakers, yeah. So yeah, there we go. Okay, and yeah, oh God, I have prattled on for 35 minutes. It is about 7 minutes less than that, and I know some people have moaned about me going on for a long time and everything, but some people like it, and obviously, you know, hi-fi is a very, it's not really a subject that you talk about. You listen to it, and you know, there are people who like it. And so, considering that, you know, the fact that these kind of videos that I make, where I talk about, you know, my auditions and stuff in hi-fi shops and whatnot, those are the ones that actually get views, you know, compared to some of my other ones, you know, still stuck on 100 views, whereas my illicit one, which someone moaned about for being too long, has had, you know, over 1,000 views. So there you go. Okay, I'm just going to be me, folks. All right, okay, I'll see you later. Bye. I said bye.